Greetings and well met, Warriors of Light. On this wondrous day, we are here for a clear purpose. Today, I will be giving you my in-depth review of the latest expansion for Final Fantasy XIV, Dawntrail. Now, this video is a bit of a switch up, as this is the first MMO review that I have done on my channel. Over the last 15 years, I have played all the mainstream MMOs known to man in the West, and thoroughly enjoyed most of them. Many cap level characters, many raids, battlegrounds, and all of the like. I started playing 14 with the release of Shadowbringers and have followed along ever since. So I'm very excited to be able to give you my honest review. This video has been reviewed on PC and will have minor dungeon spoilers by location only. So be at ease, sit back, grab a drink and enjoy as we discuss the big question: is Dawntrail worth it? Our story starts on the shores of Sharlayan, where the Warrior of Light, which is you, receives the invitation with the promise of adventure over in the new continent of Tural, which is a land laden with culture, mystery, and hard to pronounce names. After an interesting boat ride and some lengthy introductions, we are finally in what Square Enix is promoting to players as their new world. This is the start of the next 10-year journey since the conclusion of events that began from A Realm Reborn all the way through to Endwalker. Now, the first thing I have to mention right out the gate is that Dawntrail takes a long time to set up, which is funny to say, as there was a whole patch dedicated to setting up the journey of Dawntrail. Once you arrive in the new city-state of Tuliolu, you will go on a quest to meet the key players of this expansion. Now, there are many important people, but I'll give you a quick rundown of the ones that you'll interact with the most. Waklamat, a rough around the edges warrior who has far more to learn than she believes, who is essentially the new main character of this expansion, so move over, Warrior of Light. Her brother Koana, who is a tech-savvy scholar and believes innovation to be the only way forward in the world of unknown futures. Bakul Jaja, a two-headed Mamulja who is eyeing the throne of Tural. He is both fierce and cunning, who is the walking embodiment of strength. Zarulja, a single-headed Mamulja who is the perfect warrior who believes through war there are lessons and experiences to be learned. These characters are all connected through the current ruler of Tural, Galul Jaja, a two-headed Mamulja who is eager to pick his successor by using the trials that have been scattered across the land. So now the question remains, who will become the next Dawn servant? One thing I must give kudos for is, to a certain degree with most expansions, the story is somewhat predictable. While there is a bit of that going on here, it is much less than the previous expansions. I think this is owed in part to the fact that Square is attempting to build a new world with new lore that is mostly unconnected to the events that came before. Now, I don't want to mince my words. If you're hoping for a Shadowbringers or Endwalker level world-ending story, you are not going to get that here. It was quite obvious from the initial quests that the priority number one here was setting up a new area for us to play in future expansions. Does that make Dawntrail filler content? No, definitely not. But that does mean, depending on what you were looking for in the story, your mileage or enjoyment with Dawntrail will definitely differ from others. Since we as the characters are sort of in a holiday mode from saving the world, I was happy to see Waklamat take the spotlight for a while. She is rough, sometimes brash, but full of heart, and she exhibits a believable journey to a warrior fit as a champion, for the most part. However, she is not without her issues. I've seen many jokes about Waklamat being Dawntrail's equivalent of Prey Return to the Waking Sands, which, if you don't understand that reference, is by far one of the most tedious phrases that Final Fantasy will ever throw at you. Also, I would have preferred if Waklamat had more of a leading charge being the main character, and not rely on the players so much to lead her in the right direction. It felt like Square constantly stood over a line but wasn't fully committed to the narrative choice of the Warrior of Light being Waklamat's mentor, which is basically how I felt through the whole questline. I felt like Koana went on a massive journey. He is a headstrong young lad who believes in single-minded solutions, who straddles a one-type-fits-all mentality. He generally kept me guessing, and to be honest, through the early half of the main questline, he is what kept me in the race, so to speak. Overall, the character development is as solid here as it ever is, showing once again that one of 14's biggest assets is and always has been how much they invest into their world and their characters, which has to be one of the only MMOs that I've played that takes it quite to this level. Now, as always, with the good comes the bad. I've had a solid theory about the story of 14 since the post-patches of Endwalker, and I feel like Dawntrail very much confirmed my theory. I believe Square is writing Final Fantasy with two separate teams of writers. Team 1, who is known for delivering the past expansions and a multitude of big narrative moments, and Team 2, who handles the writing of the background lore, the raid content, and the side quests. Now that might not sound like a big deal, and I'm sure many developers out there do utilize multiple teams. However, I have the notion that while Dawntrail was in production, Team 1 was working on Final Fantasy XVI. I believe Team 1 had written all the main plot points of Dawntrail, the succession of Terral, and the big main story moments. I believe that Team 2 then came in and wrote all the zone stories, all the side quests, and the general lore, as well as the cutscenes that tie into the dungeons. I also believe that once Final Fantasy XVI was finished, Team 1 went straight into writing the post-patch content for Dawntrail, as the developers are quite aware that the biggest pain point of Endwalker was the issues with the post-patch content, which would be a very smart but a very telling move. Now, as we get into discussing the gameplay, the first thing I wish to speak on is how the actual launch went. It was pretty good. I updated the launcher on the minute of release, which was fairly quick. However, I was unable to log into my server, which is on the North American cluster. So the group that I played with completed a data center travel to my local lands of Australia, which is basically a temporary server move. The queue was about 1,800 players long, which I think was very decent for release day. In Endwalker, it was considerably worse and took hours just to get into the game. I only waited for about 30 minutes or so to get into the world, and the queue times did go down pretty quick after the first few hours. It was mostly smooth sailing from there, except for the occasional disconnection from the server. Most annoying thing about the disconnections was just waiting to get back in, but overall, minor issues in a mostly successful launch. Once the early access period of the expansion officially ended and the global release happened, the queues and disconnections had diminished entirely. This had allowed players to jump straight into the open world, and it should come to no shock or surprise to most people that the open world design in Dawntrail is very top notch. There are 2 new game hubs and 6 new zones to explore, which all feel gently crafted except for one in particular. It's not a bad or ugly looking zone, it's just that I feel like I have seen this design in every expansion so far. You will notice it immediately as you enter the zone, as you would have seen it many times before. The hub zones, on the other hand, are gorgeous. There is plenty to see and do in these hubs, with much more unlocking once you hit the game's cap of level 100, and the music in these hubs really put a kick in your step, but we'll speak more on the music later. You will spend a lot of time in one of these hubs and a fair amount of time in the other, so you will get plenty of time to explore every nook and cranny and discover all that they have to offer. I just want to take a moment to say that while it's not a new feature to Dawntrail, I love collecting the Aether Currents in every expansion to unlock flying, and it was no different here. I much rather this system of collecting flying as opposed to unlocking flying in the typical method of most other MMOs. Each to their own, but I would much rather collect the currents in the zone and feel a hearty reward for my time spent over throwing down some cash on unlocking the ability to fly, which I have done more times than I can count. When it comes to questing, I think your enjoyment will pretty much change depending on how you feel about the actual story being told on hand. I enjoyed the quest design for the most part, with a few subtractors. The biggest one being it took almost 2 hours of playing the expansion to fight my first enemy. And while it's nothing new for Final Fantasy to throw walls of text and cutscenes in your direction, here it's taken up to 11. I will acknowledge the fact that the runtime of the total cutscenes for Dawntrail clocks in at over 20 hours, which is around 3 hours shorter than Endwalker. There was much more story build up and more at stake with Endwalker, so Dawntrail does feel quite a lot larger. The other big issue for me is that I'm a fan of opening the quest log while running to my next destination and being able to read the descriptions of the quest that I'm doing. It's good to have a refresher, and often you will find little gems that might make you cackle uncontrollably. However, in Dawntrail, most of the main story quests have no real information. Oftentimes it'll be a one-liner that has nothing to do with the actual quest at hand. It almost felt like a form of content was missing from the game. Now, on the questing front, Square attempted quite a few new things, which I admire because it's always fun to have a fresh and new way to introduce and consume content, something that 14 hasn't been afraid to attempt historically. A very noticeable example here is the introduction of tailing missions, which if you have ever played an original Assassin's Creed game, you know exactly what I'm talking about. The game will give you a target that you are required to follow. The target will have a circular ring around them, and stepping into this ring will cause havoc for your mission. It was a fun idea, if not maybe a bit overused. My main issue with these missions comes down to the landscape of the area that they occur in. Instead of having these missions take place in the city-state with buildings to hide around and use for cover, which would be a really fun idea, the game puts you on a very linear path with almost nothing on the road ahead, except for a tree or a boulder every 10 steps or so from each other. The issue being, it then becomes obvious when the NPC will turn around to check if they are being followed, which at that point you will already be behind said tree or boulder, so there is no danger at all. And that's where I feel the quest is at a risk of almost feeling like an escort quest with the condition of standing, say, 10 feet behind your target. I would like to see these missions make a return, however with a little bit of refinement for enjoyment purpose, and with some variety. What does that look like? Who knows? The shining star of Dawntrail, without a doubt, has been the dungeons and the trials, which are always a joy to play through, however here, they are phenomenal. I've not had this much fun with the leveling and MSQ dungeons in any of the expansions so far. The locations look good, the enemy variety is high, and the mechanics have been well thought out. I also noticed that the boss fights seem to rely much more on movement style mechanics than ever before, which I think was an excellent idea, and an example of what's to come in the future. That is if you continue to do the optional boss fights after the credits roll, such as the expert level dungeons. I've always felt like leveling dungeons have been developed with sort of like a light version of mechanics for casual players to be able to complete with no stress, but would never attempt to use mechanics that you might actually see in higher level raids or trials while using a less intense requirement to complete. I'm glad to state that in Dawntrail, that is not the case. There is a great balance of showing off harder mechanics, however being at a friendly level where casual players can experience and complete them as well, without the stress factor. There is an exception to this. Holy moly. The final dungeons of the expansion go hard, and you will need to pack your lunch because they do not play around. The most fun I had all expansion was undoubtedly the time I spent in the dungeons and trials. There was a lot of dying, there was a lot of learning, but it was fun to progress with a group and hit your head against that proverbial wall until you were able to get that boss down. Never in my life have I cared so little about a loot drop in a dungeon before, and to accomplish that in an MMO veteran, that gives you brownie points in my book. Now, if you've been following me for a while, you will know that one of my favourite aspects to reviewing games is the music. You might also know that I think Soken, who is the lead composer of 14, to be a mad wizard in production. So this might come to you as a bit of a shock, but I thought the music for the most part to be quite underwhelming. I enjoyed the battle music and the themes of the two hub areas. I also understood the team wanting to go in a new direction with the style of music, as that does fit the narrative of telling this new story. However, I struggled to call back to themes that really stood out, something that I cannot say for previous expansions. There was a moment in my gameplay about halfway through the main story where I travelled to Yuktal, home of the Mamul, and it dawned on me when I heard the zone music that up until this point, nothing so far had made me stop in my tracks in awe or excitement. And believe me when I say it was quite a shocking revelation, as I feel like Soken always hits with the soundtrack. This goes for the dungeons as well. There was only twice in my dungeon experience where I felt genuinely impressed with the music. There was one moment in the story that calls back to the music used in previous expansions, and I could instantly notice that the quality of that music had been much higher than anything I had heard in my whole gameplay of Dawntrail, which will be the biggest pain point of this experience for me, as this is what I was looking forward to the most. Now that's not to say the music is horrible at all, and for the most part it does suit the theme of the expansion. However, I just feel like so much more could have been done with what they had. It almost felt like Soken and team are tired, coming off the back of making the soundtrack for Final Fantasy XVI, and one could not blame them. With the music comes the sound and the voice design. The sound is crisp, as always. Everything feels sharp with intention, and the zones sound exactly what you would expect if you were actually visiting these locations, from the ambiance to the weather, and even the sounds of the many beasts that you will encounter. It's always a joy to hear the overlapping arches of each class playing together against the sounds of the enemies that you fight, in particular the bosses. And I find it fantastic to be able to hear the NPCs of the game world, whether friend or foe, shouting out over the boss battles. To be honest, this further enhances the already immersive experience for me, especially when done in the heat of battle. The voice design is very well done. The Scion VAs crush it in every scene that they are in. Sometimes I think they show their experience when paired with the new characters, who in early story cutscenes can come off as a bit rough, but after hearing the new voices a few times it soon begins to sound natural and not so stiff and out of place. Alright, so with all that said, how do we feel and what is the verdict? Well, I will say, Square had a lot riding on them to live up to the hype. Dawntrail had the burden of creating this brand new story and having it be almost immediately as interesting as a story that came before, which is very hard to do. I do believe that if your expectations are set on having the same experience as the last two expansions, you may walk away with a bad experience up your sleeve. However, if you're open to the concept of this new world and understand that this might feel like a Realm Reborn 2024, then you will have a good time. So, do I feel that Dawntrail was a success? Yes, absolutely I do. There is more than enough here to keep you entertained and happy, with all the issues aside. If you love Final Fantasy, then this purchase is a no-brainer. You will have fun. Maybe not in every aspect, but there is more than enough good in Dawntrail to find something that will suit your tastes and love. If you are new to the MMO genre, this is a hard recommendation. Not just because it's quite clear that this story is still being set up, however the requirements to enter Dawntrail are quite large to begin with. Endwalker was such an easy expansion to commit to, being the finale of a 10-year stretch and being such a pointed conclusion. However, in Dawntrail, you will have a long road to take, or an expensive story and class skip to buy, to be able to start a new story that takes its time in the construction of events setting up the future. However, if you're someone that doesn't care about the story and just wants to hit or heal stuff, then this is an easy purchase for you, and you will have a hell of a good time. From a gameplay point of view, Final Fantasy XIV is easily one of the best MMOs on the market right now, and while they still do use a subscription model, you are getting bang for your buck. Square does also offer a free trial where you can level all the way up to 70 with no restrictions on playtime, which is an amazing offer if you aren't sold on the experience. One thing to note is that there will be content patches coming in the future that will add new stories, raids, dungeons, and most likely, gameplay changes. This may change how your class plays or how content is received, so that is always a risk in these kind of games. This has been an absolute pleasure. I'm always appreciative of the fact that I have this platform to be able to express how I feel, and as always, I eagerly look forward to seeing what is next for the future. That's a wrap for today's adventure. And remember, every epic quest starts with a single step, and you've already taken yours by joining us today. I love all the support from my fellow Warriors of Light, and I hope you enjoyed watching this video as much as I enjoyed creating it. I will see you down the line. Take care, my friends.